Greetings everyone. Welcome to day 9 of our PMP 6 exam prep step by step. So if we recall our last class, we started with the scope management, and when we started with the scope management, we first looked at plan scope management, and then we moved into collect requirements, and then we looked at define scope. We'll take it from there in this particular session, and we'll go through the remainder of this processes in the project scope management. So following define scope, we are now stepping into create WBS. WBS, the full form is work breakdown structure. And this term will come again and again and again through the course. Now, our starting point in creating WBS is what we have achieved in our previous process defined scope. So let's look at what it really involves. Now, create WBS process. The inputs that we're getting here is project management plan. And when we say project management plan, it is the scope management plan that we have just drawn. Because if you remember, project management plan is a combination of all the subsidiary plans. Then we'll have project documents and enterprise environmental factors and organization processes. And what we'll use the tools are expert judgment, because when we are going through this process, we'll be, as we'll see, talking to different experts. And decomposition is the key tool that we'll be using, because in this WBS, the whole idea of WBS, the creating WBS, is work breakdown structure, meaning we break down our deliverables that we have come up with during define scope in the scope statement, and we are going to break that down into sub deliverables, and that will be done through the decomposition process. As a result of this, we'll come up with these outputs. The key output here, as you will see, is scope baseline. Now, scope baseline, as we talked about, is one key baseline, and other two key baselines are cost baseline and schedule baseline. Essentially, this is how the performance of the project will be measured. In scope baseline, one of the components will be scope statement that we have come up with in our defined scope process. The other processes or other components that will be included in scope baselines are WBS that will be creating. Along with WBS, there will be WBS dictionary, then there will be work package that comes out of the WBS, as well as some planning package. We'll talk about that. Now, what is WBS? We talk about work breakdown structure. What is WBS? WBS is essentially a hierarchical decomposition of scope, meaning we have defined the scope, we have put together the scope from the requirements, and we have identified the deliverables that is required within the scope, what we need to achieve in the project. And what we are going to do in WBS will decompose that. And what do you mean by hierarchical? It will be decomposed in form of, for example, in the organization hierarchy. So in terms of, we put it in a hierarchy so that we know what we are decomposed a deliverable, what is the next level we got, and then next level. So it will go multiple levels as we decompose the scope into WBS. And so, in essence, what we're doing is that deliverables, we'll subdivide the project deliverables and organize it in a hierarchical fashion. Now, when we subdivide or when we work on this work breakdown structure, and when we talk about the work, we are talking in terms of deliverables. Our focus is on deliverables or the work content and not what activities is required for this work content. So our focus is on the work per se, our focus is on the deliverables. That is the important thing to remember at this point. Of course, we'll take this forward in another process to find out what are the activities. That's a different process. But here, when we're talking about WBS, we are talking about work package or work, rather at higher level work, and the lowest component in the hierarchy will be what is called the work package. Just what I have said, the lowest level of WBS components is the work package. And work package is the component or is what will drive our planning for the project. And as you've said, WBS becomes a major component of scope baseline along with scope statement. Now, why do we need to go through the WBS? The question that might come is, why do we really need to break down into sub-deliverables? Why do we need to structure it like in a hierarchical fashion and draw this WBS? What is the benefit that we're getting out of it? So one is when we break it down, it helps us to visualize the project roadmap. So with this WBS, with the details that we get out of this decomposition, we can now have a roadmap for the project saying that, hey, these are the things that I'll do at this point of time. This is what I'll be finishing till this time. This much will be the cost at this point of time, and so on. So it really helps us to visualize the roadmap and do the planning. It becomes, as a result, it becomes a critical input to many of the processes. For example, it becomes a critical input to defining activities. Now, why is that? Because work package, the lowest component of basically the deliverable in the work breakdown structure, the work package, that is what defines the planning. Or rather, we take that and find out what are the activities that we need. And then from what activities we need to perform this work package, which is the lowest level component, we can find out what will be the cost, how much time will be taken, and so on. Similarly, estimating cost. Again, this process, estimating cost, will use this WBS. Determining budget will use this WBS, and even identify risk and risk analysis. All these processes will actually use this WBS or the work package, which is the lowest level component of WBS, in their process to actually do the planning and so on. Now, when we get into WBS or creating WBS, we go through the decomposition process. And let's see how we move through as we do the decomposition of the work package. So first and foremost, what we do is we identify and analyze deliverables. Now, if you remember, in the scope statement, one of the things that comes out of this, or really the main thing that comes out of the in the scope statement, is the deliverables. What is it that we are going to deliver? And their deliverable, when we talk in the scope statement, it is typically at a higher level, but it can be, depending on how detailed the discussion went in, it can be also in much detail. So what we do is we take those deliverables, we analyze those deliverables, we identify what are those deliverables, we analyze those deliverables. And then what we do is we structure and organize in WBS form, basically. So in terms of hierarchy and so on and so forth. And then what we do is all the upper level WBS or in the work breakdown structure, the components in the upper level components in the WBS, we decompose this further because we need to decompose till we go into such a level that it can help us in the planning process. There is no point keeping it at a very high level because we'll not be able to plan with that level in the WBS. And so once we do that, we assign some identification code for each of these, because what we do is once we keep on decomposing and we get into the last level of the last level of decomposition, and the last level component, what we call is a work package, and we provide an identification codes to those work package. Now, when we do that, after we do that, we want to ensure that we have been decomposing till the last level, because this is what we want to. We want to verify degree of decomposition, because what we don't want is we don't want to decompose too much, or we don't want to decompose too less. If we decompose too much, it will not be productive. And if we don't decompose adequately, if we keep it at higher level, then we will not be able to effectively plan our project. So the decomposition should be at the right level. Now, there are some best practices when we are creating WBS. One is we should we should adopt an inclusive approach. What we really mean is we should recognize that as a project manager, all the knowledge is not with us, and we need to consult and confer with all the others who can help us in this process. Most importantly, our project team, because they'll be working at the ground level. They should be able to tell us, give us insights, and what it would mean to break it down, what are the different components that will come in play as you break it down. And of course, there will be stakeholders and users and other experts who can help us in this process. So you should take an inclusive approach. Next is, if the project is very large, we don't want to do WBS for a large project. Rather, what we would rather do is we break the large project into smaller sub-projects. And we take each of the sub-projects to create a WBS. Because if we create from the large project, it will not be manageable. Then there is this important point, which is 880 rule. Now, as we talked about in a previous slide, we said we want to verify the degree of decomposition, that we have not decomposed too much, or we have not decomposed too less. And this 880 rule, or this thumb rule, can help us in that. So what this really means is we should not decompose so much that the effort that will take to do that particular work package will be less than 8 hours. And we should not decompose to a level or keep it at that level that to do that particular piece of work, it will take us more than 80 hours. So ideally, the level at which we decompose the effort that would take for that particular work package should be between 8 and 80 hours. So that's really the rule. And of course, how much you want to decompose will depend on the components, on the projects, and so on. And this is really a thumb rule. And then we would also like to leverage on available WBS templates. Now, there might be templates available in the organization or template for the kind of projects that you are doing. So you should try to see if there are available WBS templates and use those kind of templates to actually go ahead with creating WBS. Now, there are different types of WBS. Now, for example, you can come up with different ways how you would actually create WBS, how you will go about doing the decomposition. Now, let's take a few examples. Now, we have said that we take the higher level and break it down. So let's take an example here. Let's say we are building a house. We are building a house, and then we have talked about different deliverables. So what happens is we have found out, so these are the different deliverables that we have identified. The foundation, the structures, the interiors, landscaping, project management, these are the product and project deliverables that we have identified for in building the house. Now we take one of them, and let's say we take the foundation and break it down further and say that we are saying that the foundation means that we have to draw the blueprint, we have to have dig the earth, we lay the foundation. So this is what we have come out after subdividing deliverables, that is the foundation. We've broken it further down. Similarly, we have broken this down for all the other deliverables. Structures, we are saying pillars and beams, walls, plumbing, electrical, and so on. So we have broken this down. And now this is the process that we go about. And then you can take each of them again. Let's say plumbing, you can say, we want to talk about north side plumbing, south side plumbing, and so on. Or exterior plumbing, interior plumbing, you break it down further. And so you break it down to that level that you're comfortable with planning. So this is a typical WBS. Of course, this has not gone down to the last level. Now the question is, how is it different in Agile? Now what we said when we are talking about Agile and we are talking about predictive. For example, in predictive, we go in sequential, we take all the requirements and we go ahead and we take all the requirements and move through. Which means we take all the requirements and do the WBS for all the requirements that we've identified. In Agile, however, we take in parts. So in Agile, what happens is we have what the term is epics. Epics is the greater this thing, and then from there we take user stories, which is a smaller part of the requirement, and then we go and do the work breakdown structure, and then move forward, and then get into another epics, another user stories. So we take in parts in Agile. So we don't do the work breakdown structure for the full thing. Now, there are again different approaches for WBS. For example, you can start with top-down. You can start by phases, and you can even do from the bottom up if you have done too much detailed work in the scope statement. So there are different ways you can go about in creating WBS. And at the same time, the way you structure the WBS can be very different. And again, you have to look at what really works for you in your project and what will it work in the organization you are in. So here, let's look at a few WBS, example WBS. Now, this is a WBS where we are showing that one of the, just one, we have drilled it down, broken it down to the work package level. So for example, you see if it is value management system project, that is a project, and there are at a higher level deliverable, we are saying needs assessment, standards development, system engineering, project management. And this particular deliverable, which is needs assessment 1.1, we have broken it down. First, one level, for example, current system audit, requirements determination, and so on. And then again, that level has gone down for another level, which is component identification, component analysis. Basically, we have divided to in 3 levels till we have arrived at the lowest level component, which is what we call work package. Similarly, we can do for the others, there is 1.2, 1.3, 1.4. So this is how you really break down deliverable by deliverable to its last component and what is called the work package. Sometimes what you do is you can break it down by phases. For example, in this particular one, let us see, we have, for example, one is of course project management, and then all the others, requirements, design, construct, integration, and test. They are the phases in the life cycle of the project. And we have at the second level, we have taken the phases. And then from there, we went into the product requirements, or for example, product requirements, we have gone into the work level. Software, user documentation, training and program material. Then from those, we might again get into another level and still we come up with the lowest level components. And same as you can see in the other phases as well. So this is an example where in the second level, you have gone, broken it down in phases, and then you move with the deliverable components and broken it down further and further. Then this is an example which is by major deliverables. For example, in the second level, if you see, these are all the deliverables. And then we go ahead and break it down, subdivide it to greater level till we arrive at the lowest level component, which is the work package. Now, one thing here to note is we can do it at different, we can break it down or create WBS very differently depending on our requirements, of course. But the other point to note is that it is not necessary that all the deliverables have to be decomposed at the same level. For example, one of them might be decomposed 2 levels, and then we find that we have arrived at the work package. And another, it might take us 4 levels to go. We have to go down 4 levels till we come across the work package that we can use for planning. So it really is not necessary that all of them will have to be at the same level. Now, so with this, once we have done this work package, and we have arrived at work package, we come up with what is the scope baseline. And scope baseline has different components. One is what we have arrived at in our defined scope process, and that is the project scope statement. In project scope statement, what we've seen was we have scope description, we have major deliverables we talked about, we have acceptance criteria, we have exclusion. This is what we talked about is included in the project scope statement. And then we have WBS, what we talked about. And we saw that WBS really is the hierarchical, the decomposition of the scope into its different components and arranged in a hierarchical fashion. But along with WBS, we'll have something called WBS dictionary. So what it really means is each of the component in the WBS, we will detail it out. We will detail it out and say, and we'll talk about all the details. So each of the component will have the details. And this is what will be included in the WBS dictionary. So what is it? There will be some identifier, then work description, what is the work required. And this detailing is really the lowest level components that we're getting out of the what you call the WBS. And for that work package, we are detailing so that we can use that to do our planning. So work description, who is responsible, what is the assumptions and constraints, what is the schedule, milestone and activities for this particular work, piece of work, what are the resource, cost, quality that is required for this particular work, acceptance criteria, references, agreements. So we will put down all these details in the WBS dictionary for the work package, the component that comes out of WBS. And then in addition to that, we will also have we'll put as work package. What are the work packages, which is the last level of details, and then planning package. Planning package is a concept where different work package can be looked at together in terms of planning, in terms of work. Now, there are two terms that we need to understand when we are talking about these accounts. One is control accounts, one is a code of accounts. The first and foremost, code of accounts is for tracking purpose. Essentially, all the work packages will have a code of accounts and identifier associated with it for tracking purpose. An unique identifier for these components, right? So we can, when we say tracking, means as we move through the projects, we will be able to track, are we taking care of this particular component or not? Like we talked about in the traceability matrix. And then there is a control account. A control account is where one or more work packages are clubbed together as a control account, and that is used for management control. Management control in terms of scope, schedule, cost, and so on. So basically, management will look at them together, all these work packages together, to identify where we are in terms of schedule, cost, or scope. For example, if you are developing a website for your marketing team and there is one particular page which really tracks the how much clients they are getting, and what has been the communication with the client, and what has been achieved through client communication, let's say, then that the whole thing, it will have many different components, but the whole thing will be put together as control account, so that management can look at the scope, schedule, cost as we move through the project of the full page. And another thing it's worth mentioning in terms of these control accounts. Now we have control accounts, we have work package, and we have planning package. So the relationship, the way it happens is work packages, multiple work packages can be associated with the planning package, and multiple planning package can be associated with a control account. So planning package comes in between the control account and the work package. Then our next process is the validate scope. Now validate scope, if you look at it as a process, we'll see the inputs that we have again are the project management plan, which really is the scope management plan component of the project management plan, then some documents and verified deliverables. Now, what we really mean is verified deliverable is, now validate scope, first of all, is the validation of the scope by the user, by the end user, by our stakeholders. Now, but before we give it to them, we would have verified, done the validation or quality control or testing on our side. And once we have done that, we were ready to give it to them. And in other words, we have verified those deliverables before we are handing over to the customer or the client or the user to validate. So this is what is verified deliverable, which really means at our end, we have verified that these deliverables are according to what we have put together in the, we have said we will provide in the plan. And then of course, work performance data. And then the tools that will be used are, again, inspection, decision making. Now, when we say inspection, there can be different types of inspection. And one thing to understand at this point is this inspection will vary based on what application area you are working on. The inspection that will take place in, let's say, construction will be very different from what the inspection that will take place when you are developing a software. Will be different from inspection if you are developing a car, that's a new car model. So it will really depend from application area to application area. And the decision making, again, when the validate scope is being done, there will be instances where you have to decide, well, this might not be perfect, but then what do we do? Should we take it in, or should we make the change, or should we make the change later, and so on and so forth. So there are many decision points that will come where this decision-making tools will be applied. And some of the decision-making tools we talked about, like voting, then autocratic, then multi-criteria decision analysis, and so on. And then outputs to this is really big output is the accepted deliverable. Because at the end of it, after the validation, provided that they are happy with what they're seeing, the user, the client will accept the deliverable. And another thing is a change request. Change request is, again, as they are going through, typically what will happen is you will not find that, hey, everything is fine and there are no issues. There will always be some, or rather, it's likely that there will always be some issues, and which might result in some changes. And if such changes, if there are some changes that are requested, and those will come in as change requests. Now, validate scope, it is about formalizing acceptance of completed project deliverables. That is the whole purpose of this process, validate scope. We talked about when we started the project charter and we did the defined scope, we saw that we have identified the deliverables and we have also identified what will be the acceptance criteria. And based on this acceptance criteria, they'll validate. And when they're happy, they formally accept. The user, the client needs to formally accept once they are happy about what they have received, or once this deliverable meets the acceptance criteria. Now, this validate scope can happen at phase completion or project completion. For example, if you are moving through different phases, let's say requirements, design, construction, testing. So what you might want to do is, after requirements, you might want your client or users to validate the requirements. So you are actually having this validate scope at the end of the requirements phase. Similarly, after design phase, construction phase, and so on. And again, of course, when the project is complete, there will be a validate scope process where they'll actually validate the deliverables that you're providing out of this project. One thing to remember, and again, this can be a little confusing because it can get mixed up with another process. It is important to remember here that validate scope is customer or sponsor driven inspection. It is not about us, the project team doesn't do that inspection. It is the customer who does the inspection in validate scope process. And like we said, the inspection can be done differently, and typically there might be some reviews, there might be some audits, there might be some walkthroughs, and so on and so forth. And again, I'm repeating, this will depend on the application area. Now, here are two processes. We should remember that they are different, though they have a lot of similarity. In other words, both is about inspection, validate scope as well as control quality. So both are inspection driven. Having said that, control quality process, which we will touch upon in the quality knowledge area, control quality is about inspection being conducted by the project team. The idea is here in this process that we want to ensure before we release these deliverables to the customer, we want to ensure that this satisfies all the criteria. So we are testing this one. And then once we are happy, we have verified these deliverables, it will lead to release of deliverables. Then we'll say, okay, now we are ready to release these deliverables to the customer. Then it goes to the customer And there we do it goes through the validate scope process or scope validation. And this is done by the customer or the sponsor. And once they do that, they are happy with it, they'll formally accept that. They'll say, okay, this is good, and we can go ahead and close the project or close the phase. So this is really the difference, and in PMP exam, sometimes it can become confusing. So just keep that in mind. Now, there should be a formal sign-off process when they have accepted the deliverable after the validated scope. Now, formal acceptance of deliverable for acceptance criteria, it is not that it will be randomly accepted. You remember that we have identified the deliverables and we identified the acceptance criteria. And for each acceptance criteria, they have to do the testing and or validation and accept that based on that. So there is no ambiguity, there's an objectivity to it. And there will be a formal documentation of the acceptance. Now, in reality, what you will realize is when you are going through the validated scope, it is not as straightforward as it sounds. What is going to happen is there are so many pieces that is going into the validation process. And there will be many things that will go through without any issues, but there is highly likely there are many things that users might view it differently, might find issues, and so on. And then a discussion will start coming up. Discussion will come up. Sometimes it is straightforward. Okay, there is an issue that needs to be fixed. And sometimes there might be, and what is called, there's no clear cut understanding. In that sense, it might be what they're asking for an enhancement or change from what they've asked before in the plan, and so, might be it is something that we have not provided to them. So what happens is you go through these discussions, and then whatever the result that comes out, you put together in as a formal documentation, saying that, okay, this is fine, we are accepting that. Having said that, these are the things that needs to be changed, or these are the things that will be, maybe they'll raise many change requests, and some of the change we accept that we will do it before it moves to the production, and some changes maybe we say no, let's look at this change request as a new project because this was not there in the original plan. And at the end of the day, you come to discussion and come to an agreement what is best for the business. So this, and there will be some documented work performance information, how the project has performed, and there will be some approved changes to documents as well. Because what happens is when we go through the validate scope and there are some changes that goes because of the validate scope, correspondingly, there might be some project documents that needs to be changed. And if those documents are changed, then that has to be approved as well. So we have to remember to take care of all this during the formal sign-off process. Because if, let's say, change a new feature we have added out of the validated scope, and we have not changed the requirements document or the scope document, then both will be out of sync. So as we make this change, we'll also ensure that the project document associated with it has been changed and approved by the user or the stakeholder. And then the final process that we'll discuss in this scope management is the control scope. Now, control scope we have talked about before is really about ensuring that the scope is within control and there are no scope creeps. Let's look at what it looks like as a process. Inputs, again, scope management plan, documents, project documents, and there's some work performance data and the organization process assets. Tools that we'll use primarily are variance analysis and trend analysis. Variance analysis really is about where we are corresponding to where we should have been. Actual versus plan. That is the kind of analysis, the variance analysis. What is the variance? Trend analysis, as opposed to variance analysis, looks at the historical trend and determines, and the trend analysis helps us determine, are things deteriorating, are things the same, or are things improving, and so on. So this is what the trend analysis help us to determine. Outputs that we get out of control scope is, because we're controlling the scope, there will be, of course, some work performance information, but then change requests. There might be some change that comes up as a result of this control scope. The control scope is about managing changes to scope baseline. Now, again, we are not saying that we're not doing changes to scope baseline or scope baseline. We are saying managing changes. In other words, changes will be done in a controlled fashion. And of course, we talked about in different life cycle, how we view changes is different. In adaptive life cycle, we encourage change all the time, whereas in the predictive, we don't really encourage change because we believe we have a fixed requirements and there should not be much changes in the project, though there are inevitably all the time. So again, coming to what I've just mentioned, control scope is about managing changes to scope baseline. And what it really means, all corrective or preventive actions that comes about are processed through change control process. We talked about the process, integrated change control. And all the changes we will take through the change control process. And when we do that, we will be able to prevent scope creep. Scope creep is when changes are absorbed by the project without going through the change control process. And as a result, what can happen is, you have taken the change, maybe as additional features have to be added and users have asked for that. And because we have not changed the cost or the budget, we have not changed the schedule, and then later on what we find, the project has become unmanageable. So when we go through the change control process, we are able to prevent the scope creep. The data analysis, we talked about two kinds of data analysis will come about here. One is a variance analysis, and this variance analysis is really differences between baseline and actual performance. So we see where we are and what was the baseline. In other words, what are the things that is there in the, for example, scope baseline, what is there and what is it that we have actually delivered. so far at this point of time, because this control scope goes along with the project as we go with the execution. And if there are differences, we try to find the cause and the degree of differences and what kind of action that needs to be taken, corrective action or preventive action. As we are going through that, we do the corrective action, but we might also come across some things that if we do will prevent it from happening in the future. Let's say we are in one area, we are finding there are a lot of errors that are coming. And then we realize that there is not enough documentation that is going in as we are working through that particular area. And then we decide, hey, let us go ahead and ensure that there is enough documentation when we are making a change or making any work on this area, so that later on there won't be so much of errors, because we have been documenting properly now compared to what we have been doing before. And other kind of data analysis is a trend analysis. Basically, it examines performance over time. You see over time in the past how things have been moving. For example, has the errors kept on increasing? Has the errors kept on decreasing? And if it has been kept on increasing, then we have to find out what is it that is giving us this trend. We need to stand that. And so we have to investigate and find a solution to that. And if it is improving, the performance is improving, then we know that we are on the right track. So it really determines if performance is improving or deteriorate. So essentially, there are two types of data analysis we talk about here. One is variance analysis, one is a trend analysis. So with this, we have finished this particular knowledge area, which is the scope management. And tomorrow we'll step into the next knowledge area, which is the schedule management. Thank you for being with me today. And I'll send you the quiz question exercise or practice questions for this